I don't think there's a scientist or a medical doctor around who would argue against this statement I'm about to make, and that is all of our bodies are producing potentially cancerous or cancerous cells all the time. He said, you tested positive in all 12 sites. It's Gleason score 9, very aggressive. You need to see an oncologist right away. I felt almost like I was out of my body. It was like a surreal experience. And then it just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks that this was real and this was serious. Is as long as it didn't harm my healthy cells, my healthy mitochondria, because I view it as a mitochondrial dysfunction, as long as it only benefited my mitochondria, didn't hurt it. And I'll never forget this. I was sitting in one of the top oncologists here in LA who specializes in prostate. And he sat there trying to convince me that if I would do chemo in conjunction with the Lupron shots, that it would extend my lifespan, ready for this, by 7 months. It's your life. It's kind of, you have to make the decisions that are right for you. One of the things I was doing that was terribly wrong was I wasn't ever fasting.
Ryan Muncie is probably the smartest guy I know.
Trust me, Muncie is the nutrition guy.
Ryan Muncie's out there trying to make the world better for all of us.
The Optimal Performance Podcast is bold, edgy, creative, entertaining, and epic.
Ryan Muncie is my go-to guy.
Ryan Muncie he's the first guy I call.
He's making people's lives better. Ryan Muncie's an innovator.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Optimal Performance Podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Muncie. Today, we are joined by one of the coolest people that I've ever met. Eric Remensperger is a cancer survivor. As you'll hear in this episode, Eric was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer. It was metastatic and it was a 9 on the Gleason scale. Basically, that means it's as bad as it could possibly be. He survived, and he's going to tell us how he did it. We're going to talk about sort of the metabolism of cancer. Cancer is a disease, stages of our health and our immune system. And I guess now's as good a time as any for a disclaimer. This is not medical advice. What we are telling you is what Eric used to defeat cancer in his situation. So this isn't a hypothesis. This is what he actually did. This is his experience. And again, it's not medical advice. It's just what he used to defeat cancer. So take it with a grain of salt. Look into everything. There are a ton of resources that we talk about on this show, a bunch of names, a bunch of books. As you know, we will put all of those in the show notes for you. Go to naturalstacks.com for the blog post on this episode that has all of those links and resources. I was introduced to Eric through a few of our mutual friends and former guests on the podcast, Mr. Ben Greenfield, Todd White at Dry Farm Wines. Eric has been on the Ben Greenfield show. I will link to that in the show notes for you guys. That is a really in-depth podcast as well. If you want more, definitely check that one out. We are going to talk about curcumin a little bit in this show. So because Natural Stacks makes an amazing curcumin product, I've got a coupon code for you. Curcumin, OPP, all capitals, no spaces, CURCUMINOPP. Put that code in at checkout. You'll get 50% off of your first bottle, your first month, when you put curcumin on a subscription. All right? Curcumin, OPP. As always, go to iTunes, leave us a 5-star review. If we read your review on the air, we will hook you up with free Natural Stacks products. I've got a review right here. Let me grab my phone and read one for you. Invaluable podcast from Vic24Ian. 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 Shoot me an email, Ryan@naturalstacks.com. We'll hook you up for this amazing review. Vic says, if you listen to health-related podcasts, this should be in your top 3 easily. Muncie is a great interviewer, asking great questions, having poignant comments, and gets down to the grit of the topic in a way that is more easily digested by the listener. The people interviewed and the topics of discussion bridge the gap as well as a bit of crossover from other podcasts and is a crucial addition to my podcast lineup. Invaluable information for personal optimal performance. Vic, thank you. It means a lot. Appreciate your feedback. Appreciate your support. Thank you for being a part of our OPP family. One more 5-star Paleo Chef Eat Play Crush. I guess that's specific to that episode. This is from Marcher 310. Yeah, okay. This was an awesome interview with Mary. I wanted to get to know her better and hang out with her. Loved her message for life. So Mary, if you're listening to this show, you got a huge fan here. Marcher 310. Email me, just like Vic, Ryan@naturalstacks.com. We will get you a little care package as a thank you. Look, as you guys listen to this episode, you're going to hear some things that maybe you know. You're going to hear some things that maybe you didn't know. There's a lot of really important information in this show that we want to spread to as many people as possible. I know I say this at the end of the show, but I'll say it to you now as well. Cancer is something that if it hasn't touched our life, your life in some way yet, I hope it never does. But I think we're at a point in today's world where almost every single one of us has a friend or a family member who's been through cancer. It's becoming more and more prevalent, and we'll actually lead this episode off with a study talking about exactly how prevalent it has become. But there's a lot of valuable information in here. So as you listen to this, share the podcast, share this episode with people you know who will benefit from the things that we're talking about today. I want to thank Eric for coming on the show and sharing some of this really, really valuable information. And I want to thank you for being here, being a part of the OPP family, and for your support. It means a lot. We couldn't do this without you. And let's get to it. Thanks for being here. Eric, thanks for hanging out with us on the OPP.
Well, thank you for having me, Ryan. This is such a pleasure. Such a pleasure. I love your show.
Yeah. So before we dive in, I actually shared a recently published paper that I want to go through and just share that with people listening to the show in case they didn't see it on social media. But this was a report published July 10th, so about a week ago, on Medscape by the UK's leading cancer charity, Macmillan Cancer Support. And they found, or they looked at the data and they found that it is now more common for an individual to be diagnosed with cancer than for an individual to get married, have a first child, or be awarded a degree from a university. And to me, that's just insane. And I'm watching your face as I read this because I want to see your reaction. Now, remember this, for you guys listening, this is UK only, but still, the latest data estimates over 365,000 cancer diagnoses per year in the UK. That's over 1,000 people a day diagnosed with cancer every single day, and in the UK alone. So when I saw that, when I read that, it was just an immediate red flag to me. And Eric, I think you and I, and most of our listeners are already aware of this, but as a society, we're doing something or some things wrong.
Correct.
And that's what I really want to dive into with you today, Eric. And, one thing that they did point out that I think is worth highlighting is that in 1970 or the 70s, the survival rate for those diagnosed with cancer was 1 in 4. And they're defining survival rate as living beyond 10 years after that diagnosis. Mm-hmm. And now the survival rate is 1 in 2. So I know we're going to talk today a lot about alternative treatments and, things outside of the medical orthodoxy. But it is interesting to note that, cancer survival rates are different. And maybe that's something that we can touch on, Eric. But you said something, you've been on several podcasts before. You said something on Ben Greenfield's show that I think is a great place for us to start. And I'm paraphrasing here, so feel free to explain this and put it in context that you want. But you said something to the effect that cancer is more of a spectrum and less of a you have it or you don't have it, that we are always cancering or healing. Explain that.
Sure. I don't think there's a scientist or a medical doctor around who would argue against this statement I'm about to make, and that is all of our bodies are producing potentially cancerous or cancerous cells all the time. The question is your body's immune system functioning to a level that keeps those cells in check? And the only difference between someone who's been diagnosed with what we call as a disease, cancer, which I view as merely a symptom of a long-standing condition I call cancering as a verb, is the fact that it's now evolved to the state where it shows up. Your body wasn't addressing it, and so the immune system wasn't shutting it down. It wasn't going through the normal apoptotic process. And so you eventually find yourself in a state where it can be seen on an MRI or a CT scan. And at that point, it's pretty far advanced. So that's really, to me, the symptom of the disease. That's not really cancer. Cancering is just a process that kind of leads to that condition. So with that in mind, I think it's interesting the way you kind of started this discussion with this study in England, which I find fascinating. I hadn't heard that. And I'm not surprised to hear it. And I'm sure some doctors would say, oh, it's only because we have earlier detection and we can find this stuff sooner. Therefore, we know more people that have it that might have not been diagnosed with it. But to me, that's really not the case. The fact is, by the time we actually diagnose cancer by finding it on a CT scan or an MRI, it's got to be 2 centimeters or something that's going to show up. And by then you have literally billions of cancer cells that have been proliferating for a long period of time. And so and just for those of your listeners who may not have heard Ben Greenfield's podcast, I had stage 4, Gleason score 9, all 12 sites in my prostate tested positive for a very aggressive form of cancer. And it was outside the prostate, which meant surgery was not an option. They kind of just said, there's nothing we can do. We're just going to hope for the best, which actually turned out to be a blessing. We can talk about that, but everyone's walking around with oncoproteins in their system. So you have an oncoblot test, you're going to test positive for proteins from cancer. But the question is, at what level are you concerned about it? At what point do you need to kind of change your protocols, change your lifestyle, make certain changes to see if you can't move back into a healing state? That's really the question.
What is that level? And is there a way that listeners can go and ask for that sort of a test?
They can if they go see an integrative doctor. Not all of them do or subscribe to the theory behind the oncoblot test. There's actually different versions of that test that are not just testing for the onco protein, which is it's part of the cancer. Only cancers produce these oncoproteins. So the levels in your blood is a good indicator. There's another test called the RGCC test out of Greece that looks for cancer stem cells in your body and kind of does the same thing, but just focusing on the cancer stem cells. Both of these tests, I think, are good indicators, probably the RGCC a little better than the oncoblot, if you kind of know your threshold, just to see which direction your body's moving in. Are you moving more into a healing state, or are you moving, is the cancer progressing and you're getting more into a cancering state? But I don't know anyone can answer your question, Ryan, which is there kind of a threshold under which you don't have to worry about it? Because it really depends upon the individual, the type of cancer, where you are, what age you are. So none of these tests are, I think, good indicators to say, oh, you don't have to worry about it. No, you do. But they are good markers if you want to kind of monitor the progression of the disease.
Right. Well, let's take a step back. And you mentioned your background. And, that is something that, you and I are recording this before I record. Or you haven't heard the intro, but I definitely, that is in the intro. So if people at this point listening in the show are aware of your background, but
Sure.
Walk us through what that was like. You're sitting in the doctor's office and you get that diagnosis. What goes through your mind?
Ooh, that's a good question. And it's just kind of looking back to the process. I'll step back a little bit. I ran through a whole battery of tests. My first test was just a blood test to see what my PSA level was and my other blood markers were, and a digital exam. And those kind of came back saying something's definitely awry. We don't know what it is. And that originally got my, hair on the back of my neck to be a little more, stand up. I'm a little nervous here, but I kind of convinced myself that I was far too healthy to have cancer. What I had was, something benign. In prostate, they call it benign prostate hyperplasia, BPH. And so I was convinced that ultimately all the tests would come back and say, yes, you just have benign version of this, whatever it is. And it was really, I wasn't sitting in a doctor's office. I was sitting at home. I hadn't had the biopsy. The biopsy was kind of the final marker. I had a CT scan. I had an MRI. I had a bone scan. I had a biopsy. And the biopsy came in last. And I remember I was sitting at home. I was watching, I don't watch television very often, but I was really trying to get my mind off of what I was going through and just trying to figure out, okay, what's happening with my life? Where's this all coming from? And the phone rang, and it was probably 8 o'clock at night. And it was my oncologist, who happens to be a good friend of mine. We do yoga together. He's a great doctor. And he said, you look like your test results are back. And I could tell from the tone of his voice that he was going to cut right to the chase, and it wasn't going to be good. And so I immediately kind of held my breath and tensed up a little bit. He said, you tested positive in all 12 sites. It's Gleason score 9, very aggressive. You need to see an oncologist right away. And I remember, you ever have those moments where you kind of stand up when your blood sugar is too low and kind of everything starts to black out? Mm-hmm. I had the same thing, but it was more like a whiteout. It's like everything in my world just kind of came grinding to a halt. And the initial reaction I had was shock. It's like, I can't believe I heard what I just heard. I just can't believe these words are coming out of his mouth. And I felt almost like I was out of my body. It was like a surreal experience. And then it just kind of hit me like a ton of bricks that this was real and this was serious. And I don't know how else to explain it other than to say that I really started questioning everything that I had been doing for the last 20 years to be healthy, and whether all of that was just really a bunch of nonsense. And, I should have just been smoking cigarettes and eating McDonald's because the outcome's not going to be any different, kind of thing. And I obviously felt sorry for myself, and I was crying and all that stuff, which anybody I think would be normal to go through. And it probably took about 2 days. And I just woke up one morning and I felt like, I'm going to take what was a real kind of deep-seated passion of mine to study and really understand wellness, mostly in the nutrition space, but outside nutrition, studying things like meditation and, quantum physics and, NLP and all these other things. And I was going to really just do a really deep dive to see if I couldn't understand what the hell happened and how I ended up where I ended up.
Well, that's one of my next questions for you, because I know one of the next steps that you took, and it fascinates me. I think it speaks a lot to, who you are and your mindset in that moment. But before we do that, just for our listeners' sake, stage 4, metastatic, 9 on the Gleason scale. Basically, that means it's as bad as it could have been, right?
That's right. That's exactly right. And it was very aggressive. So prostate cancer is usually not that aggressive.
Right. And with it being metastatic, did it show up in places other than your prostate?
Well, yes, it showed up in the lymph nodes and it showed up in the bone region, but all in the groin. It hadn't spread to, to other parts of my body. It was all kind of, and that was my oncologist said, look, I got some good news. I got some good news and bad news kind of thing. And the good news is it's all in that one area, which means you're not going to die in 6 months or something. Mm-hmm. The metastases obviously is what they tried, what you really want to try to avoid when it comes to cancer, because I think the general prognosis amongst the traditional established doctor kind of circles is that once it's metastatic, it's really hard to contain, and it's just a matter of time. But obviously that's not the case.
Yeah, and I want to really
not always the case, I should say. Not always the case.
Right. I want to highlight that, and we'll talk about the role that traditional medicine played, the extent that it was involved in your recovery. But, let's go back to what you did, this deep dive. You read 21 books in 14 days after the diagnosis.
It was 14 books in 21 days, but I really went crazy. Yeah, I did. And I'm still on that same bandwagon, by the way. I have 5 books going on at a time, and I finish at least one a week. Okay,
that's my dyslexia coming through. 14 books, 21 days.
Yeah.
What were some of the biggest eye openers there?
I'd say probably the most shocking thing for me to see was the perspective of the healing condition or establishing a healing state between allopathic medicals, because I read books that were written by traditional oncologists on chemotherapy and radiology and other treatments, and kind of the more esoteric version of healing that you might find in some of the books that are written by the more alternative doctors. It was just interesting to me to see that they had both completely different views of the world, not just medicine. An allopathic doctor knows a lot about a very narrow segment of whatever it is they're studied in.
And to be clear for people listening, that's your MDs.
Yes. Allopathic is what I call standard of care, or, and I use this with quotes, evidence-based medicine, because I can find holes in all sorts of that evidence. It's not hard to do. Unfortunately, you need to have evidence-based for it to become standard of care, for it to be paid for by insurance. It's an unfortunate consequence of our medical establishment. But if it's either standard of care or what I call integrative or alternative.
So having read that, what was your approach? I mean, it sounds like from everything I've heard that you took the Bruce Lee approach. You kind of absorbed what is useful and discarded the rest.
Right. That's right. I kind of tried to do, because this is the way my brain works, I tried to do a very kind of analytical, very clear kind of path of progression, analytical framework. I tried to really kind of understand the genesis of the disease in order to determine what would be the right approach to address the disease. And so my initial part of the dive, and what I spent most of my time with early on in the process, was trying to really understand what I considered to be, and of course this is my opinion, I'm not a doctor, but based on my read of the evidence that's out there, and folks much smarter than I, like Tom Seifried and others, what causes cancer in the first place? Because to me, I don't know how anyone could possibly decide how to address a condition without knowing what the cause of that condition is. It just doesn't make any sense to me.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, so that was kind of my initial approach. I did implement some of the protocols early on before I kind of finished that process. Things like hyperbaric oxygen, only because I was in ketosis at the time I got cancer. I was not therapeutic, but I was in a nutritional ketogenic pretty much for about 6 months before I was paleo before that for years. But I had heard the works of Don D'Agostino and Tom Seifried, and I knew that hyperbaric oxygen would be. And once the test results came back that said it was outside the prostate, there was no question that I was going to jump into an HBOT chamber.
Mm-hmm. did you get your own, or did you just find one locally?
No, unfortunately, in order to do it right, if you're trying to do it at a therapeutic level, you can't use one of those soft-sided chambers. Mm-hmm. So those use an oxygen generator. Those don't really get it as high level you need to be at in order to have full therapeutic effect. So yeah, I did use a local hyperbaric chamber center. Okay. And I went there 3 days a week initially. I now go once a week.
Okay. So you're still doing it?
Believe me, I'm very kind of, and we can talk at any point if you want to talk about it, I can tell you kind of where I am and how I ended up. But I started off kind of doing a lot, and then I kind of phased things out, but I didn't completely cut anything out.
Okay. Yeah. Let's dive into that now. So, maybe run down the list of some of the things that you discovered through your reading and incorporated into your healing practices and how you've kept up with them now.
Okay. All right. Let's start with kind of one of the underlying kind of pillars of what I consider to be the right therapies to use, and that's oxidative stress. And we can talk about kind of the underlying premise for that, but I viewed oxidative stressors to be a really powerful therapeutic benefit for addressing cancer. And so the way I would hyperoxygenate my system included, in addition to the hyperbaric oxygen, I also got one of those live O2 machines. So I do the exercise with oxygen therapy. Mm-hmm. I just implemented that as part of my exercise regime instead of just working out in my interval part of my workout. I would just use that machine. I also have a machine at home that produces ozone gas that's hooked up to an oxygen tank. And so I do this rectal ozone insufflation. And I was doing that every single day. And it's just a way of getting ozone into your bloodstream, into your system. And it's kind of a benefit that the prostate and the colon are right next to each other. So if you're trying to address cancer in that region, it's obviously, it's not limited to that. You can get ozone into your blood other ways, but the other ways require that you go into a doctor's office and have blood drawn and that sort of thing.
Now, the theory behind that is that we know cancer cannot survive in an oxygenated alkaline environment.
Yeah, well, there's some cancers that can survive with oxygen, but they don't use oxygen, okay? And there are some cancers that just cannot survive at all in a highly oxygenated environment. And I don't know whether my cancer falls into one category or the other, but I do know that it does slow down dramatically the progression of the disease. I was trying to rein this thing in. Mm-hmm. And so this whole kind of fermentation process, the glycolysis, the cancer cells, when they're going through that process, produce a lot of lactic acid. And that becomes very toxic to the neighboring cells. And that allows for the proliferation or spreading of the disease. Whereas if you can really raise the level of oxygen within the cellular structure, you effectively offset that. And so it has a much harder time spreading or proliferating. So there's to me, it's a win-win, right? Mm-hmm. There's no downside to it. And that was one of the yardsticks that I would apply to any of the protocols, is as long as it didn't harm my healthy cells, my healthy mitochondria, because I view it as a mitochondrial dysfunction, as long as it only benefited my mitochondria, didn't hurt it, even if it didn't benefit but didn't hurt it, I might try something. But I wouldn't do anything that would harm the mitochondria, which is why chemotherapy and radiation were kind of on the back burner.
Gotcha. Okay. So after oxygenation,
oxygenation is one. Another one is hydration. And it kind of ties into the same thing, because you really need proper hydration in order to get your cells fully oxygenated and to keep the cells from being too acidic if you're not well hydrated. So hydration was another one. And so that requires, not only do you need to have very good, clean sources of water and proper electrolyte balance, which I'm sure all your listeners, the majority of them already know a lot about, because most athletes do. But it also involves, interestingly enough, kind of how the electron transport chain works. And it's interesting because the mitochondria actually produce water as part of their process, right? They produce carbon dioxide and water as part of that process. And so you want your mitochondria really to be able to respirate well so it can produce its own water to help facilitate this functioning of your cell. Mm-hmm. And that breaks it down to kind of a very kind of quantum level. You get down to the quantum level, you kind of get lost in the weeds. But
yeah, so as you're going through that, like I hear a lot of Jack Cruz and how he's always talking about basically, I mean, and I remember this from college and science classes that, cellular respiration and, glycolysis are like the reverse reaction. So,
yes, exactly. I would say, another underlying premise of my therapies, and this actually came, I wouldn't answer this question the same way 2 months ago, but as this is a work in progress and I'm always learning new things. But I kind of intuitively knew that because of the studies of the work of Wilhelm Reich and some others, that it's really important to have this kind of redox effect constantly working within your system. So you need both oxidative stress, where your cells are losing electrons, and then the reduction where your cells are gaining electrons. It's that movement. It's that electron transport across the electron transport chain that actually allows for a lot of what we call life. And I know Jack talks about this, and he really can get into the weeds on this stuff. And I love listening to him. I lose him sometimes, but the more I listen, the more I kind of pick it up. But yeah, I completely agree with that. And so obviously, if you follow that to its logical conclusion, then another part of the kind of hydration, oxygenation, health of the mitochondria requires that you have healthy levels of light. You have good light, good sunlight, and healthy levels of avoiding bad light, right, as much as you possibly can. And so that's another thing I think that ultimately ties into, and this is like a web, Ryan, right? None of it, you can't just pull one thing out and say, okay, nutrition is important or oxygenation. They're all very much intertwined and interrelated to one another. For example, sleep. Sleep is part of the detoxification process.
Right.
If you're not sleeping, you're not healing. Right.
Right. No, I think that's a very excellent point to remind all of our listeners and for all of us to just remind ourselves every once in a while is that, if any one phase of this lifestyle gets out of whack, it's going to have, there's like a domino effect in the way it impacts the rest of everything we do, because it is all interrelated.
Right.
You mentioned sunlight and vitamin D. That was a big part of your routine, but not for the reason that most people might think, right?
Right. That's right. And we can talk a little bit about that. And I tell you, this whole idea of Nagelese and the GCMAF issue and how your body, it has to do with how your body's immune system is able to detect and recognize cancer cells. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that you necessarily need to. GCMF has a lot of conspiratorial elements to it. If you've studied, there's been some doctors that were big proponents of it that all mysteriously kind of died at the same time. And at least all sorts of, of course, the internet loves that sort of thing, right?
Bloggers I'm laughing, but it's not a laughing matter. I mean, what Eric is saying is dead serious. There were, I don't remember the numbers, but 10 or 20?
There were 3 in Florida in particular that all knew each other. They were all kind of, died about the same time, and they're all big proponents of this.
And they were like very mysterious causes. And right. if you just Google, doctor disappearance in Florida or something like that, you'll come up with some crazy stories. But this happened a while back, and it was at PaleoFX 2016. Right. Siltep creator Abelard Lindsay and I were having a conversation with a guy who I will make sure that his name is not known, because he at an alternative cancer treatment facility, they were doing some of that stuff, and he didn't want to come on the podcast and talk about it because he was afraid that he might also disappear.
I totally get it. You won't see a lot of mention of it on my site. Initially, I will do some blog posts on it because I think it's important. And I think you can address it in a way that's non-controversial. And I do that by using what's called Bravo yogurt, which is a form of yogurt out of Switzerland. You actually buy it on John Gray's site. And there's other sites. There's other points where you can buy that. You make it at home. But it's a way of kind of reducing those Nagelese levels. You want to keep those levels down.
Give our listeners just a quick rundown on what's going on there in case they haven't heard anything about Nagelese or the GCMAF. Yeah,
GCMAF, and I don't have my notes in front of me, so it's going to be hard for me to quote the exact kind of scientific name of it. But what it does is it's part of the body's normal way of recognizing when cells are not functioning the way they should. And the way it does that is GCMAF is a component or element that's produced within the body that helps them recognize cancerous cells. So you want to raise your GCMAF levels. And you can actually get exogenous GCMAF, which is what these doctors were doing to try to address that problem. It's Nagelese. I got my wires crossed there for a second. It's Nagelese levels that are high that mean it's going to be that much harder for your cells, your white blood cells, the killer cells, to recognize those cancer cells and address the cancer cells. And again, I'd love to get maybe my notes in front of me, do a whole blog post on this, but the idea is to reduce those Nagelese levels as much as you can so your body can naturally function the way it should. And you can also do exogenous GCMAF if you can find it. Find a doctor who's willing to do it kind of on the QT, that sort of thing. This Bravo yogurt is really designed to do, I think, the former, which is reduce those Nagelese levels. So the GCMAF can do its job. And I can, if you want, for the show notes, I may be able to have a couple of things I can send you if you want to put in there. But
yeah, let's definitely do that. If you have the blog post or if it's going to be written, send me the link and we'll put that in the show notes for you guys listening.
Sure. I'd be happy to do that. I have lots and lots of material to write about. No shortage. So
I guess for our listeners, I mean, let's talk a little bit about the role that modern medicine played in your recovery. Right. I mean, you mentioned chemo and radiation were immediately sort of in the back of your mind because of their negative impact on mitochondria.
Right. Okay. And with my particular cancer, because it was stage 4, surgery was not an option. And originally I was kind of grateful because as laughable as it might have seemed to the doctors that I was seeing early on, my goal was to retain the prostate and have it return to a healthy state. And I don't think there's a doctor alive who would have said that would have been feasible, although I'm convinced I can do it. And we can talk about kind of where I am and how that process is unfolding. But so the treatment protocol for prostate cancer and breast cancer, although I'm not as familiar, obviously, with the breast cancer component, is there's some hormonal therapies. For prostate cancer, the hormonal therapy is to shut down your testosterone production. For breast cancer, it has more to do with the estrogen. And the way they do that is that there's 2 different versions. There's a drug called Casodex, which is a pill you can take that shuts down the receptors. And then there are different versions of a shot you can take that really stop your body from producing testosterone. I chose to take Lupron on a 30-day rolling basis because I wanted to be able to cycle off. And one of the reasons why I decided this made sense, even though it was standard of care, is I didn't want to. I was having trouble urinating. This is an acute condition. I was not focused on the chronic element at that point. I was focused on the fact that I really got to get my my body to function again. And so this would, anything I could throw at it. This is one. I also, it didn't seem to me that it would have any potential long-term harm effects because all I had to do was cycle off it. And eventually your testosterone production will resume. And so it did in fact cycle off in early January, and my testosterone just came back perfectly fine. So your body will kind of reboot, if you will. That's the only standard of care therapy that I did. I was recommended to do chemotherapy. And I'll never forget this. I was sitting in one of the top oncologists here in LA who specializes in prostate. And he sat there trying to convince me that if I would do chemo in conjunction with the Lupron shots, that it would extend my lifespan, ready for this, by 7 months. And I looked at him and I said, I paused for a second and I didn't know what to say. I said, you have to be kidding me. I said, you honestly believe that you could determine that someone's life would have ended on December 7th and instead it ended on July 7th because they had done chemotherapy in adjunction? I said, how could you say that? How do you even know that? I mean, this is all based on statistical analysis. And I just find that to just be a bunch of crockets of shit, if I could say that on your show.
Yeah.
And so I was just completely flabbergasted that was even suggested. I mean, the fact that they would even mention that it would extend my life for 7 months. And then I told them this. I said, I would rather die 7 months early healthy than go through chemotherapy. Right? If I
what was their response to that?
Well, he of course, he didn't know what to say at that point, because I think most patients say, look, doc, anything you can do that's going to keep me alive, please do it. In fact, multiply it by 2, right? Double my chemo. That's, I think, half the population out there just says, look, do it all and then some. But I was definitely not in that camp.
So here's a question I have for you. I mean, as you're going through the healing and recovery process, I mean, obviously you're going back in, you're getting checkups, you're getting lab tests. What's the interaction like with the doctors when you're telling them, these types of conversations where you're refusing chemo, you're telling them what you're doing? Because I'm sure they're asking you what you're doing.
Yeah.
How much pushback did you get? What was the friction like with those interactions?
I think it could have been really problematic for me if I had chosen the wrong team of doctors. I kind of based my yardstick on how well I thought I could work with the doctors, because I didn't want them to think I was just going to be a little passive, let you make the decisions for me. And one of the primary, I think, most important, if there's only one piece of information that you could possibly get out of this podcast that you should take with, if you're considering not just cancer, but any serious health condition, is even the best doctor in the world, even if you were to see Chris Kresser, they're only going to be able to give you a tiny little segment of their attention, right? And they have great advice and that's all great, but it's your life. It's kind of, you have to make the decisions that are right for you. And I think it's especially prevalent or important for cancer patients to understand that, because an oncologist is going to push you really hard to get into some very serious drugs and go through the the chemotherapy process, which is extremely toxic and it's devastating to your immune system. And so even if they are able to get your cancer into complete remission using that kind of standard of care, chances are the cancer is going to resurface somewhere else, because your immune system is just not functioning. And you didn't get to the underlying cause of the disease either.
Right. And I think that circles back to exactly what we said in the very beginning, is A, understanding the root cause of this thing, and B, keeping your immune system healthy so that you can prevent that shift of cancering as a verb to cancer as a noun.
Correct. That's right. But getting back to your question about how I kind of felt, because I had been good about picking doctors, I have 3 doctors, and my integrative doctor I chose because there was a specific therapy that I wanted to use that she was kind of an expert in, even though she's not an oncologist integrative doctor. She doesn't specialize in cancer. And that's this whole area called anthroposophical medicine. Rudolf Steiner, the guy who started Waldorf schools and biodynamic gardening. And, he was also a big kind of scientist in kind of the food and nutrition space and health space. Even though he wasn't a scientist, he was kind of a clairvoyant. But he said that cancer could be addressed, or best addressed, or one way to address cancer is through mistletoe, a derivative of the mistletoe, which is kind of an antagonist, if you will, of the immune system. And so in Germany, he was Austrian. And so in Germany, it's quite common for doctors to prescribe Iscador, which is what it's called, or here we call it Viscum, because the government tried to shut it down when they called it Iscador, so they just changed the name. And these are harmless shots. I give myself a Viscum shot 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday nights before I go to bed. And it's, it's subcutaneous. It's, you put it in your fat, and it's a little tiny glass vial about this big. And I just do that as a matter of course. I'll probably do it the rest of my life. But to me, it's anything that I can do that's that harmless, that really might be beneficial. Now, whether I can say, did it have a huge impact or not, I really couldn't tell you that. But I know if they do it in Germany, and Germany's got, I think, a pretty progressive medical system. Mm-hmm. As a matter of course, there must be some clinical trials out there that show that it has some efficacy. Yeah.
And there's a couple other things that you've done, mechanisms, I guess, if you want to look at cancer sort of at its energetic basis, bions and
yes.
Qi.
Qi. Ben calls it Qi, but it's spelled QI. It's pronounced Qi. It's a for those who don't know Chinese medicine, it's kind of the underlying basis of what we know as Chinese medicine or acupuncture, traditional Chinese medicine. Yeah, I come to the conclusion that cancer is a metabolic disease, right? I'm totally on board with that. I agree with Tom, and I agree with Otto Warburg and all this stuff. And I follow these guys, but I say, okay, but that doesn't still answer the question for me. I still have the question, what caused this problem with respiration? How did that start in the first place? Right? I want to go a little bit deeper here.
Right.
And that's what took me into the PA bions and the Qi.
Right. And just to back up, I mean, for our listeners, if they didn't catch you on Ben, I mean, you were a health nut before the cancer diagnosis. So in your mind, like you were doing everything right before this shouldn't have happened.
Right. That's right. That's right. And I think one of the things I was doing that was terribly wrong was I wasn't ever fasting. I was never allowing the autophagetic state, the autophagy, to kick in, that kind of ability of the cells to clean themselves out. And, I was flooding my body with nutrients, right? I had that crazy shake. And so I was taking excessive amounts of nutrients on a daily basis on this insane idea that if a little is good, a lot must be great. And never allowing this kind of redox to occur, right? The electrons are I was only reducing. I was never oxidating. I was never allowing those electrons to move back and forth nutritionally. And so I'm convinced that one of the reasons why I ended up with such an advanced and aggressive form of cancer, even though I was so healthy, is because, yeah, sure, I was healthy. And I was consuming nothing but super healthy, highly energy supporting nutrients, but without ever allowing my body to take a break.
Right.
It's just constant. It was constant. And so fasting is a huge part of what my protocols now.
So what does that look like exactly now? I mean, are we talking intermittent fasting where maybe you go 18 to 23 hours every single day, or are you doing the 3 or 5 hour complete fast? Or I'm not sorry, not 3 or 5 days. Right.
Yeah. I was originally doing, well, first of all, my very first treatment protocol was an 8-day water fast, which I originally started, it came about kind of, it's odd because I hadn't really kind of I hadn't done the deep dive into how that impacts your level of ketones and, the other therapeutic benefits. But there was a book that talked about the master cleanse, and I figured, okay, I'm going to do the master cleanse. So I bought a bunch of maple syrup, and I bought a shitload of lemons and some, cayenne pepper, which, by the way, I literally did it one day. I don't think I even finished the full day's dose, and I just went into a complete sugar shock. I mean, keep in mind, I was in ketosis before I tried doing this, right?
Right.
And so I just literally had to throw all that nonsense away, all that maple syrup and all those. I kept the lemons. and so I did an 8-day water fast. And so I think I just, intuitively knew that this would help. And I think it did help because it got my ketones way up. And it also allowed my body to clean itself out, which I hadn't done before that. That was my first real experience of fasting, ever, intentionally anyway. There may have been days when I was starved and really wanted to eat. But now what I do is I do a 4 to 5 day fast every 2 months. I was doing 3 days once a month, but I've done some research and I've come to the conclusion that you really got to do more than 3 days to get really the therapeutic benefits of a longer term fast. And I think 4 is the minimum, and 5 is probably, if you can do longer, great, but 4 to 5 days is where you want to be. And so I do that every other month. I do intermittent fasting every day. If you count having, butter coffee as part of your fast, because I typically, when I intermittent fast in the morning, but I get up at 5:30. I won't have my first cup of coffee until 10:30 or so, or 10 o'clock. Or if I'm on the road, maybe I'll stop at a coffee shop at 9:30. But I'm literally up for 3 or 4 hours before I have that first cup of coffee.
Right.
So I don't eat until 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. So I intermittent fast every day. And then I do a 24-hour fast, probably 2 or 3 times in between those fasts, the 4 to 5 day fast. Usually when I'm traveling, or if I'm so busy. I'm sure you've had those days where it's just boom, 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 boom. I don't have time to eat. No big deal. I'll wait till dinner and I'll eat. Yeah. When you're in your ketosis, it's not hard to do. And so when I'm traveling to New York, for example, I'll eat dinner on Monday night, get on the plane Tuesday morning, arrive in New York, and have my next meal Tuesday night for dinner. So and I do that really for 2 reasons. One is to keep my level of ketones high, because that's a good way to do it. And 2 is to make sure that I'm getting my chance to, the apoptosis and the autophagy, making sure my system is having that redox effect.
Gotcha. So since we're talking about some of the things that you're doing now to sort of keep things where you want them, let's look at prostate levels. I'm curious. I've actually, this is way back in the beginning when I was very young as a personal trainer. I was working with a guy who had prostate cancer, survived, and his testosterone levels were non-existent. He had horrible issues with weight gain. He was on some of the traditional, standard of care stuff and post chemical castration type stuff. Right. But he couldn't build muscle and he couldn't keep weight off. You look like, I'm only seeing from the neck up, but you look like you're lean and muscular. Right. How are you able to, kind of keep those things in the realm that you want them in with testosterone levels that, you have to manage carefully to prevent, the prostate cancer from coming back?
Yeah, that was one of the things I was really afraid of when I first got on that therapy, because I spent a lot of time into being physically fit, and I was really concerned about the impact that it would have on my physique and my strength and my ability to function.
Well, not only that, but just testosterone for a man, that's your zest for life.
Yeah, that's right. That's absolutely right. I'd say, and this again, you probably know more about this than I do, Ryan, but I think being in ketosis helped a lot. It just helped a lot because my energy levels were always very consistent and stable. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't ever in a point where my body had to kind of eat away muscle mass in order to keep my glucose levels where they should be. Right. That just didn't happen. So I didn't lose a lot of muscle. I think my workout routines, it's interesting. Being in ketosis really strengthened my ability, for example, to do a difficult level 2-3 vinyasa flow yoga class, right? There's one I used to take that literally, an hour and 15 minutes to an hour and a half class, I thought I was going to drop dead. Mm-hmm. I just thought, just get me through the next 15 minutes. Once I had moved even into the nutritional stage of ketosis and certainly into the therapeutic stage, I'm looking at the clock saying, oh my God, class is over. I go for another hour. Yep. It's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah, I will totally second that from an endurance and being able to go at a low intensity forever. Right. Even in nutritional ketosis, there's huge benefit there. Now, for you guys listening, if you've heard the podcast I did on ketosis for a power athlete, maybe not so much, but you have to know goal and context. Why are you doing it?
I think that's absolutely right. So I think that's part of it. I did notice that I didn't have tremendous gains in my ability to increase my weights in the resistance stuff. For example, I started introducing pull-ups and chin-ups into my regular workout routine, just because I thought it would kind of really help build upper body without necessarily having to use constantly just doing machine work. And I can do, I could easily do. I'm not like a super athlete, but I could do, say, 5 very clean, clear pull-ups, right? Wide grip pull-ups. And when I was just doing ketosis, I could easily do 5, sometimes 7, When I was taking the testosterone, I found it hard to do 3. You know what I mean? Wow. It's like my ability to endure intense workouts was fine, but my level of strength was down. Right. I could lift weights, but I couldn't keep increasing the weights on a regular basis. And I'm not somebody who's trying to be a bodybuilder. I just think it's good for, it's good to not just have one form of workout. And I think as you get older, you want to put weight on your bones, and you want to continue to maintain your as you age, because Let's see. Okay, I'm back. As you age, you lose muscle. Normally, it's part of the normal aging process. So the more you can do early on, the better off you are when you hit that wall. And
it's much easier from an aging standpoint to maintain than to build muscle mass.
Yes. And I was not at all into health or wellness or fitness until I hit 40 years old. I can tell you that for sure. I was the last. My idea of a workout was going outside to have a cigarette because my wife wouldn't let me smoke in the house. That was my idea of a workout. And I was 2-pack a day, workaholic, heavy drinker. You wouldn't see me in the gym. And I was, I wasn't turned terribly overweight, but I was in terrible shape. I was ridiculously awful shape.
Well, Eric, I want to dive into this massive health shake and look at a couple of the ingredients specifically in terms of, functional foods that can help fight cancer. But before we do that, is there anything else?
I want to make sure there's one thing that's very clear. I no longer take the shake.
The
shake that I was using at the time I was diagnosed with cancer.
All right. Well, then we won't touch it at all then.
I can tell you what I took out. There's a lot of stuff I took out of here.
What did you take out? I'm more interested in that. What
I would say it's probably better to talk about what I left in. I still put in, I still do some Dulse seaweed. I still do the spirulina and chlorella, although I pulse that because I think it's nice for your body to kind of have a lot and then not have any. I do the astragalus and the schisandra. I don't do any sunflower lecithin. I now do in my powder arco tea, which we can talk about in a second. The cinnamon powder, I now do the Ceylon cinnamon in my powder arco tea. I don't do any of these others. The maca, the tongat, those are all kind of testosterone producing. I didn't want to. Pine pollen, again, supports testosterone. These are all things that I decided I should just avoid.
It's funny because I actually wrote that as a note next to that ingredient. Like, are you worried about this elevating your testosterone?
That's why I took it out.
Okay.
So I mean, I do have a slightly modified version, but it's much, much more, it's much less crazy.
Do you still do the natto?
I do. I do the natto in my shake.
That's really hard to find. Do you have any recommendations for our listeners if they wanted to?
Yes, and I'll have to look it up and send you the link to the website. I'll take notes here. There's a company that will ship it to your house, frozen.
Okay.
And it's actually the best natto out there. It's organic. It comes in little plastic containers. And so if you don't live near an Asian mart, even though I live not far from an Asian mart, I just find it easier to order it in the mail and have it delivered to my house.
I think sometimes for me, it's a little bit more comforting to know, like if I go to one of those Asian marts, I can't always read the ingredients or know the sourcing.
Right. Yeah. No, this company I think is good because they don't put it in styrofoam. There's other versions that are organic, but it comes in styrofoam, and I don't need anything that comes in styrofoam. And B, it's organic. So it's important when you're having anything with soy in it to make sure it's organic and not GMO.
Right.
Even natto.
What about the avocado pit?
Yeah, I don't know where I heard that from. It might have been Rhonda Patrick talked about it. The avocado pit apparently has a lot of nutrients in it. And when you put it in your shake, you don't even know it's there. If you're using a Vitamix, which I use to blend my shake, I can't tell the difference between the shake when I have it and the shake when I don't. Now, let me just make sure your listeners understand there's a big caveat here. I put in a ton of peppermint and lemon in my, I take a nice healthy lemon and I cut it in half. I grind in all the skin, seeds, everything, throw it in the shake with all that mint. I don't know if it's peppermint, but the mint you buy when you go to the farmer's market in the green section. And I put some rosemary in there and I put some basil in there. So there's so much in there that you don't even know the natto's there. If I took if I don't put the mint and lemon and a little stevia in there, my shake is undrinkable. It's undrinkable. It's just terrible. But with it in there, it's pretty good. I love it.
For you guys listening, if you go to the blog post for this in the show notes, I will put the entire shake in there so you can see all of the ingredients that were there. And again, I think I didn't realize that this was at the time of your diagnosis. I thought this was something you did afterwards.
I was doing this every day. This is what I should have been. Yeah.
So the advice isn't necessarily to replicate and put this shake into your day.
No,
there's nothing inherently wrong with it. It's just.
Yeah, I would say if somebody really wanted to be crazy insane with nutrients, and this is more a male than a female version of the drink because of the pine pollen, the tongat, and some of the other ingredients, I would say, do the shake, but don't do it every day.
I counted, there are 48 ingredients
Yeah. And it would take me, this is how it would work, Ryan. I went on a Saturday or a Sunday, I would line up all my glass jars and I would do all the dry stuff that you see on the first page. And then I would put those in the cabinet where they would sit. And then on the next morning, I'd take one out. I would add all the wet ingredients, and then I would put it back in the refrigerator and I'd let it soak overnight because it had to basically spend the night fermenting and doing all the things it's going to do. And then, so it's basically, that's the process. And then the next morning after it had been sitting overnight so that all the nuts can sprout, et cetera, I would put it in my Vitamix with the vegetables, which I'd add that day, the same day, and blend it up, and that would be my shake for the day. And it would literally fill the Vitamix right to the top. So it's really 2 meals worth of liquid. It's a lot of liquid. You couldn't drink it all in one sitting. And I did that every day. It was just my thing. And people would call me that guy. He's that green shake guy. I would go to, we had the California Club here, and I'm a lawyer, and I walk in there with my suit on and my bag, and I pull out this jar full of green stuff, and everyone else is eating the rubber chicken, and I'd be drinking this green stuff out of my jar. And I was just that guy. But I was so healthy, right? I was going to live to be 100. I was never going to get cancer, right?
Yep. So you mentioned a tea that you drink now. Let's talk about that.
Okay, it's actually Pau de Arco tea was recommended on several of the sites that I went through all these different websites to talk about natural cures for cancer, and it kept popping up. And I went to see a clinic in Phoenix and talked to, it was an integrative clinic down there, and I talked to the doctor there, and he recommended it. So I had heard it from probably, half a dozen, maybe 8 different sources, that how important it was. And so I did a little research on it. It has a lot of therapeutic benefits. I think with respect to cancer, the benefits might be related to the reduction of the acidity level in the bloodstream with all that lactic acid. Mm-hmm. Don't quote me on it. I don't have my notes in front of me, but it clearly had some therapeutic benefit. And then I was on Ben's site, and he had this little Pau de Arco tea that he was, I think Mercola might have recommended, where you put some curcumin powder, turmeric powder, in there, just get some really healthy organic turmeric powder. You put some soy lecithin, and then if you want, you can add a little bit of fat like brain octane. And I would basically take that, and I added 2 teaspoons of Ceylon cinnamon to it because I liked the way the Ceylon tastes, and I wanted to make sure I was getting my Ceylon cinnamon every day. That's a way of kind of reducing your levels of blood sugar. Right? Mm-hmm. Ceylon cinnamon, Ben talks a lot about that. And so I figure, okay, here's 2 birds, 1 stone. I'm going to add Ceylon cinnamon. So I would use that shake. But what I did was I have a stack. And if you go on my website, you can see the list of what I take every day in the way of supplements. And they're all kind of focused on cancer as a condition. Some are to deal with angiogenesis, kind of anti-angiogenesis drugs. Others to do with levels of blood sugar, all sorts of. By the way, if you do go on it, I've taken off cayenne pepper, so it's on there, but I have to update the website. That's now off the list. I've substituted something else because that's a lectin. And I read the Plant Paradox, and I wanted to get all the lectins out of my diet. Anyway, but I would take my daily stack with that Pau de Arco blend, with the curcumin, with the soy lecithin, organic, which, by the way, is a lectin. Sunflower seeds are lectin.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. So you did swap soy lecithin for sunflower lecithin?
No, I'm sorry. I'm still using sunflower. You're right. It is a lectin. I'm trying to get the lectins out. Okay. I'm hoping that it's so processed that the lectins are no longer there. But I have to do some research on that. But the reason why I would take that shake and have my supplements with that is because, as you know, anything with turmeric in it is going to help bioavailability. And so I thought this might be a good way of getting the bioavailability of all these supplements I'm taking every day, or I miss a day or 2 a week, but pretty much every day. So I do those in the afternoon.
You drink that tea in the afternoon?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I do that in the afternoon when I take my supplements. And if I don't do that tea because I'm making my new shake, I'll just put the Pau de Arco tea in my shake and just use that and take my supplements with the shake.
Okay. Very cool. Very cool. You mentioned you replaced the cayenne. What did you put in instead of that?
Oh, I don't have it in front of me, but there's a doctor who I'm actually going to have a call with after this who recommended it's an anti-angiogenesis drug that I just ordered and got recently, started taking it 3 days ago.
Okay.
I'll go pull it up and it'll be added to my list on my website. I'm going to take off the Ceylon. I'm going to put that one on.
Okay. And we'll put that in the show notes for you guys listening if you're curious.
Sure.
Okay.
Sure.
Cool. Eric, this has been fascinating. I feel like we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything that you feel like is crucial to impart onto our listeners that we haven't covered?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really important for people to understand, we kind of open with this, Ryan, is that, having cancer is not a death sentence. And I know that the medical establishment wants you to believe that it is, and that only they can kind of prevent that, prolong the effect of that, or put off the effect of that. I think that there's more than just anecdotal evidence out there, that there are a lot of therapies that can be used to help rein the cancering process in and help you move it back into a healing state, whether you do it with standard of care or in lieu of standard of care. And so I guess the most important thing that I would want people to know is, if you do get a diagnosis or you're struggling with cancer, you need to kind of find yourself in the right mindset. I'm a firm believer in that this is going to sound really, really strange to a lot of people, but this has really been a positive thing for me, because it's taken this passion I've had and it's really given me a purpose, right? My passion has found a purpose, is what I like to say. Mm-hmm. And it's that kind of desire to get up in the morning and have calls like this with people like you that I get excited about. And it's that excitement. It's that emotional excitement that's the most healing thing you can have. Mm-hmm. And you really got to find that space, because the energetic stuff's the most challenging, but I think it's also the most powerful.
I will second that. It's definitely the most powerful, most rewarding. And I mean, even I love getting to do the podcast, and because it allows me to connect with people like you. And I much prefer to be able to do them in person, but even on a call like this, I feel a connection and I feel an exchange of energy, and hopefully our listeners can tune in and get a piece of that when they listen as well. If you had to recommend, I know you've read a lot of books, you've mentioned a ton of names, Willem Reich, we talked about Jack Kruse, you mentioned Otto Warburg, John Grays, all of these names, Dominic D'Agostino, who, if you guys haven't heard that ketone podcast with him, go back and check that one out. That was last November.
Yeah, that was a good one.
Thank you. Dom did all the work. I just asked questions.
Yeah.
And Mike Nelson, he was on there. Mike's a great guy.
Yeah.
I'll have links to all those folks in the show notes. Right. So save those people, or outside of those people, if you could only refer listeners to maybe one or two books that would change the way they thought about cancer or healing, what would those books be?
That's an easy question. Travis Christofferson's Tripping Over the Truth is, bar none, hands down, the best book out there. And I highly recommend that book to. There you go.
It was within reach.
Yeah, there you go. I mean, that book really, I think, had a very profound impact on me, because it wasn't the first book I read. It was probably the 7th or 8th book I stumbled upon as I was going through the initial list of books. And as soon as I read that book, I thought, geez, everybody with cancer should read this book. And it kind of, as an aside, I've talked to every doctor I've interviewed, and I've interviewed probably 12. And there's others that I'm still talking to, because I continue to reach out and get introduced to these folks. Only the integrative doctors were even aware, and only a few of them were aware of that book. In fact, it's funny, I gave a copy to my integrative doctor, and then I was seeing a doctor who does hyperthermia treatments here. He's a radiologist here in Santa Monica. We have a hyperthermia. And I'm talking to him about hypothermia. And I mentioned that book, and he said, "Oh, funny you should mention it." He goes, "I was just talking to Melanie Gisler, who is my integrative doctor." There's a plug for you, Melanie. And she said, she just recommended this book to me. And I said, guess who she heard about it from? So she's now spreading it around to her friends. That's
beautiful.
That's beautiful. So it's a great book. And I think he does a really good job of kind of laying out exactly kind of what the history is behind the current medical perspective of cancer, and kind of how things evolved to where we are now, and then really gets into the weeds about the metabolic stuff and some of the therapies that people are kind of focusing on as potential ways of using the metabolic.
Yeah, and you're back, I think. So I'll use this as a chance to make a request to our network. If there's anybody listening who has a connection to Travis, we'd love to have him on the show. So if anybody can make that introduction or help me get in touch with him, I'd be grateful, and we'll bring him on the show and share some information with you guys.
Absolutely. No question. He would be great. I've heard him speak several. He's great. He knows this stuff. And he's just like a scientist journalist is what he is, right? Mm-hmm. That's what he does.
Eric, you know what time it is?
Time for us to wrap things up.
It's time for you to answer the question that all of our guests answer.
Okay.
Before you, I'll give you just a second to kind of think on that in the back of your head. Your top 3 tips to live optimal.
Okay.
Where can our listeners get more of you if they want to find you? You mentioned your website.
Yes. Okay. It's www.questtocurecancer.com. It's a new site. It's been up as of the middle of May. May 15th is when I finally got it up. It took about 4 months. I'm still working my day job, so this is a labor of love and a passion of mine. There's a ton of information on that site as to kind of how I'm going to break everything down in the overview for the pillars and the protocols. And now I'm starting to put into that site kind of more detail, more information about each of the protocols so people can actually see what, and I want to have videos on there so they can see how I make my Budwig blend and how all these things are done, how you do the ozone treatment. Much easier for people to kind of understand if they can see it. And I would encourage your listeners to go on that site. There's a place on the site where you can reach out and ask me questions, and I answer all those questions. And it's a work in progress. I want to get as much feedback as I can from my own audience so that I can really make sure that what I put out there has some real value. So that's it.
So I'm going to buy you a little bit extra time because you mentioned the oxygen machine again, and I think this is becoming a theme. You mentioned the T that you had heard through different people. Once you hear something being recommended 5, 6, 7 times, it starts to kind of hit you in the head, and you're like, well, maybe I should start paying attention to this. But with the Live O2. Ben has one. He was recently on the show and talked about it. And then one of our previous guests, Dr. John Lawrence, if you're listening, I know Dr. John listens. Hi, John. But he is a big fan of hyper and hypo-oxygenation, kind of playing with that. And he's a big fan of hooking up to one of those machines and, playing with oxygenation during workouts as well. So, I have a Live O2. I have a Live O2 machine as well. So you mentioned Live O2 and then the ozone.
Yes, in the ozone and hyperbaric oxygen, and also interesting. And I know we don't have a lot of time to get more into this stuff, but even like high dose vitamin C, when you do it at that level of 50 grams to 75 grams, it actually converts into hydrogen peroxide in your system, which gives it that oxidative stress therapy on the cancer. Mm-hmm. So that's another oxidative stress. You think of vitamin C as an antioxidant, but it does high levels. It's not. It's oxidative.
And when you were doing that high level, that was oral?
No, I was doing IV.
Okay.
You got to do IV, yeah. The jury's still out as to whether liposomal on an oral basis would work. I know that regular vitamin C just doesn't work. Yeah,
that's, I'm forgetting the documentary. I think it may have been Food Matters, where they were showcasing a few of the alternative cancer treatments that do IV vitamin C injections at really, really high doses and have shown positive results in regards to killing and getting rid of tumors with those. And that was part of the conversation that we were having with the gentleman at PaleoFX last year. He was a part of one of those facilities. So definitely, if you guys want to look into that, definitely look into vitamin C for really high doses there. So, all right. Top three tips.
Top 3 tips. Okay. It's hard to narrow it down to 3, but I'll tell you what I think the top 3 are.
Okay.
And actually, I'd say they all somehow tie back to sleep. All 3 of them tie back in one form or another to sleep, because I think getting a really good restful sleep is really important for the healing process overall and for how you perform throughout the day, right? The better your sleep, the better you feel about yourself. The first one I would say is getting out early in the morning, getting some sunlight. I think sunlight is so therapeutic. It is really, I can't tell you how important it is for all sorts of reasons. And one of them is early morning sun is obviously much better than afternoon sun, because afternoon sun gets to be too intense, but it really helps set that kind of circadian rhythm in a proper place, and it gets your melatonin level, which Jack Kruse talks about. Your body's not going to produce melatonin if you don't get that early morning sun. So for those of you who don't like getting up in the morning, this might be a good wake-up call or inspiration, if you will, to get to bed early so you can get out there and get that. I love the early part of the day. I get up at 5:30 in the morning, and I just love when that sun's coming up. It's just so special.
It's my favorite part of the day. It just seems like anything's possible.
Yes, it does. It does. And if you can keep the screens off and keep not listening to these great podcasts until a little bit later in the day, it's that clarity of consciousness that happens when you transition from sleep to wake. If you have silence and kind of just can, do your routines in the morning, you get up. And so that's one. I think tied into that is really kind of having good hydration protocols. And I'd say drink is the cleanest water you can. And I drink spring water, comes to my house delivered in a glass bottle. And we could do another podcast kind of talk about some of these protocols, but getting hydration first thing in the morning. I drink about 40 ounces of water before I have my first cup of coffee, and I do that for a couple of reasons. And the one that ties back to sleep is it's in the sleep process that your body's really cleaning itself out and detoxifying itself while you're asleep. And so your liver has now taken all of these toxins and moved it in, so it can now be flushed out of your system in a water soluble format. And if you don't drink enough water first thing in the morning and all you do is have a cup of coffee, all those toxins get absorbed back into your liver. And so you never get that cleaning out system. So get your hydration, make sure you have the electrolytes in there, get your hydration early in the morning. That's two. And the third is, I would say, meditation. And this one sounds a little bit, believe me, I struggled with this for a long time because I've been trying to meditate for 20 years. And when I got diagnosed with cancer, I went out and I signed up for TM and I went to the training because I decided, look, if I'm going to spend $1,000, maybe I'll actually do it on a regular basis. And I'm now to the point where I've kind of adopted it into my daily routines. I try to go to the beach in the morning, get in the ocean and get my grounding and all that stuff. But I found that since I do that grounding in the morning, and I just snuck in a fourth if you didn't miss that. So I cheated.
I caught it. But I'm allowing it because it's part of my morning routine as well.
Yeah, it's really, once I started doing that, my sleep at night just improved dramatically.
Yeah.
Dramatically. I sleep great.
If you guys listening didn't catch that, it was grounding. So as part of your morning meditation and while you're drinking your water and while you're getting that morning sunlight, just be barefoot and grab a tree. Exactly. Or if you live within walking distance of the ocean, get in the ocean too.
Exactly. If all these things, these three most important things, or four, if I could cheat, are all things you can do before you have your first cup of bulletproof coffee. I mean, that's what's great about it. Yep. And it'll change the rest of your day. It really will.
I mean, it's 5 minutes that will change the rest of your day every single day.
Yeah.
And I actually follow that up. I come inside. It's almost identical to my morning routine, but I come inside and I take a cold shower.
Yes, I do. Because I go in the ocean, and the ocean's not that cold this time of year, but it's always between 50 and 55 degrees, which of course is pretty optimal if you want to be. It's not like being in an ice bath, but it definitely gets your blood down, your temperature in your blood down. And so I try to get in the ocean. If I can't do it every day, I do it 5 days a week for at least 15 minutes just to be in the ocean.
Yep.
And plus, you're getting all the probiotics and it's the oxygen, the salt,
negative ions, from the water, and beautiful.
Yeah,
Eric, this has been an awesome show. Thank you so much for coming on. I'd love to have you back and maybe talk about some of these water protocols and some of the other stuff that we kind of touched on.
I would be thrilled.
Weren't able to dig into. So I also, after we record, after I stop the recording, we'll talk about maybe visiting you in Santa Monica because I plan to be in the area soon. So
okay, good.
Maybe we'll grab some food. But for you guys listening, go to naturalstacks.com. You'll be able to see the blog post for this and go to iTunes, leave us a 5-star review. If we read your review on the air, we will hook you up with free Natural Stacks products. Remember the code that I told you at the beginning of the show for curcumin, because we talked about that on this show. Natural Stacks has an amazing curcumin product, and we will hook you up with 50% off of your first month when you put it on subscription. The code is curcumin OPP. And as always, share the Optimal Performance Podcast with the people in your life who you know will benefit from and enjoy the things that we're talking about. I think there's a lot of really, really valuable information that Eric shared with us today. Get that in the hands of people that you love and care about, anybody who needs to know this. We live in an age now where we're almost every single one of us knows someone or is in some way touched by cancer. So get this episode in their hands. Even if it's the first podcast they've ever listened to, teach them how to listen to a podcast. And that's it. Thank you guys for listening. Eric, thanks a lot.
Thank you, Ryan.